We'll now begin the concurrent session 3.1 titled New Arms Race. This session will be moderated by Mr. Timothy Martin, the Korea Bureau Chief for the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Martin, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Let me jump right in. Last night, we had the privilege to hear a speech from Karen House, who among her many achievements is the former publisher of my company, the Wall Street Journal. And she recalled a conversation she had recently with the former head of CIA, where they identified global proliferation as the world's greatest risk. And that's the topic we're here to discuss today, the global arms race in Asia. And as luck would have it, we have a lot of intellectual firepower here on stage to discuss the topic. So let me introduce our panelists. Directly to my left is Dr. Tilman Ruff. He's a board member and former president of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, founding chair of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and honorary principal fellow in the School of Population and Global Health at the University of Melbourne. Next to him is Mr. Randall Shriver, chairman of the board at the Project 2049 Institute and a partner at Pacific Solutions, LLC. He served as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs, and previously also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor to the Deputy Secretary of State. Next to him is Dr. Shin Bum-chol, former Vice Minister of National Defense for the Republic of Korea. Previously served as a Senior Fellow at the Asan Institute, so he's got some home ties here, for policy studies, and a tenured professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. And he was also the Director General for Policy Planning at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 2013 to 2016. Next up is Mr. Tokuchi Hideshi, President of the Research Institute for Peace and Security in Japan, also a Senior Fellow of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, and served as Vice Minister of Defense and International Affairs from 2014 to 2015. Last but not least, we have Major General Yao Yun-jo, Senior Advisor at Beijing Zhongshan Forum, joined the People's Liberation Army in 1970, and served as Deputy Director and Director of a Research Office, Director of a Research Center at the Academy of Military Sciences, and a research focus on security issues in the Asia-Pacific region, including China-US military relations, international arms control, and disarmament. So we'll have some opening remarks from each of our panelists. I will ask follow-ups as a journalist might in this situation. And then we'll have probably a second round of questions and then leave plenty of time for the audience to weigh in with their thoughts. So with no further ado, Dr. Ruff, please kick us off.
Thanks very much. And I thank the Asan Institute for the opportunity to join this timely panel. Physicians, one of our jobs is to tell people often what they don't like to hear. And I fear this may be in the same category, but I think it's quite possible that the future of the world will be determined by the outcome of the arms race that's currently underway, centred on this region, and the risks, particularly of nuclear war erupting in Northeast Asia. And at present, unfortunately, I think we're headed largely down the same track as the last Cold War, which on numerous occasions brought humanity to the brink of nuclear Armageddon. So the nuclear situation globally, as has been emphasised repeatedly through this plenum, is rather bleak. Nuclear weapon stockpiles are increasing in 6 nations, including the 3 nuclear-armed ones here. All of the nuclear-armed states are involved in extensive long-term modernisation of arsenals that's leading to longer-range, stealthier, more accurate, faster weapons that increase the danger of their use and potentially lower the threshold for their use, and I think don't speak well of their commitment to the disarmament that they're obligated to. Hard-won treaties have been abrogated and nothing is being negotiated to replace them. Explicit threats to use nuclear weapons have proliferated, including currently into alarming hot wars directly involving nuclear-armed states. The doomsday clock stands at 90 seconds to midnight, further forward than it's ever been. And cyber warfare and artificial intelligence capabilities increase the potential number of actors and ways in which a nuclear war could start. And disinformation undermines the evidence-based good governance that we need to manage complex problems. A climate-stressed world is already a world that is seeing more armed conflict and more casualties arising from it, and we're seeing really a dearth of leadership on disarmament. Nuclear weapons are being used as instruments of policy, providing essentially impunity for the kind of coercive and aggressive action that Russia is undertaking in Ukraine. And it also fundamentally undermines the cooperation we so desperately need on many other complex issues. The 32 nuclear umbrella states, South Korea and my own country, Australia included, claim to support disarmament and non-proliferation, but I'm afraid we can't really have it both ways. While we support nuclear weapons in some hands and provide justification and possible assistance for their use, we largely remain part of the problem rather than the solutions to nuclear dangers. As your eminent former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon remarked, there are no right hands for the wrong weapons. For me, the essential reality as a physician about nuclear weapons are that every day that they exist and are deployed, for as long as they're retained, there's a risk that they will one day be used, and that risk becomes inevitable if they're retained indefinitely. Once the threshold of use is crossed, all of the evidence tells us that the risks of rapid, very difficult to control large-scale escalation are extremely high. I can tell you that there is no meaningful humanitarian response to even a single nuclear detonation on a city, let alone any effective response to a nuclear war. And while we're well aware of the casualties of burns, blast and radiation, I think too few of us are aware that nuclear weapons constitute the greatest acute risk to the sustainable, hospitable climate that we all need, that needs protecting not just from uncontrolled heating, but from the abrupt ice age conditions that would result from nuclear weapons detonated on cities, even in relatively small numbers. So robust science shows that even a regional nuclear war involving less than 3% of the global nuclear arsenal detonated on cities would loft so much sooty smoke into the upper atmosphere, circle the globe, cool, darken and dry the climate beneath, decimate agriculture and put over 2 billion people at risk of starvation within the first 2 years. A nuclear war involving a high proportion of the global arsenal would extinguish most of humanity and many other living things along with us. So durably preventing nuclear war really requires the elimination of nuclear weapons. They really render meaningless any distinction between winners and losers, and there are essentially no circumstances, I would argue, that could justify such an existential price. So in my way of thinking, they're essentially global suicide bombs that simply can't and mustn't be used. The only really good news in this space is the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that was negotiated in 2017, now has 70 states parties, 93 signatures. This year we expect Indonesia and Brazil to be among those who ratify. And it applies the lessons of what's worked to control other major types of indiscriminate and inhumane weapons, chemical and biological weapons, cluster munitions and landmines. It provides a comprehensive and categorical prohibition on the worst weapons of mass destruction. It modestly strengthens nuclear safeguards. For the first time in the nuclear field, it provides obligations for victim assistance and environmental remediation for people in areas damaged by nuclear use and testing. And it does contain the only framework for the elimination of nuclear weapons that's codified in any international instrument. With the notable exception of Mongolia, there's been very little constructive engagement with this treaty in Northeast Asia. I would note that by contrast, in Southeast Asia, every state but Singapore has joined the TPNW. As well, of course, they've all joined the Bangkok Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty. And 10 states in Oceania have also joined the ban treaty. In dangerous times, work to reduce the danger is most crucial, and lack of unity makes leadership all the more crucial. All nations, nuclear armed or not, have a vital stake and responsibility in achieving a world freed from nuclear weapons. But of course, only the 9 states owning nuclear weapons can actually negotiate to eliminate them. But the security and prosperity in Asia, the theme of this conference, and probably everywhere, really depends on them doing so, and doing so before it's too late, because we're not likely to get a second chance to do the right thing. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Quite a apocalyptic start there on what happens if nuclear weapons were deployed. But Dr. Reff, if I could ask a follow-up, you said involvement from Northeast Asia has been troubling relative to even just other parts of the region. Why do you think that is, and what could spark more involvement?
I think disappointingly, all of the states in this region, with the exception of Mongolia, are either nuclear armed or intensely involved in nuclear alliances. And there has unfortunately been consistent opposition from the nuclear armed and nuclear allied states to the development of this treaty. And I think to a regrettable and really unjustifiable extent. For example, this was the first multilateral disarmament negotiation that my own nation ever boycotted. I think for the worst weapons of mass destruction, the last to be prohibited, that's inexcusable. But I think the same applies to South Korea and Japan and others in this region. I think because the nuclear armed states in many respects have had a kind of hegemony and like to control things in how nuclear weapons are debated and discussed, and the forums that negotiate instruments that control them, they really didn't like the rest of the world, the non-nuclear armed states, taking the lead in a process that they couldn't stop, using the United Nations General Assembly, the most fundamental and democratic organ of all the world's nations, in a way that I think was very effectively used. And so therefore there's been regrettably consistent opposition from nuclear armed and allied states, in contrast to what we've seen with other weapons of mass destruction and other unacceptable weapons prohibition treaties. And I hope that changes.
Thank you. Maybe we pass it next to Mr. Shriver.
Sure. Okay, that was much worse than my last trip to the doctor. Although I was told to cut back on carbs. And anyway, thank you to Asan for having me. Probably the worst thing you want from a panelist is to start by arguing with the topic and pushing back on the description of this session. But we're here to talk about an arms race and security dilemma. And I don't think that's fundamentally what's happening in the region. I think there are certain countries that are modernizing with great rapidity and investment of a lot of resources. The United States, our defense budget isn't keeping pace with inflation, and of course we have global interests and are spread out quite significantly. Japan, yes, doubling their defense budget, but that's still at a very modest 2% of GDP. So I think I want to push back a little bit on this notion of security dilemma, because academics would say a security dilemma is when people do things for their own defense and it's misread, misunderstood, and taken as intention for offensive operations that put you at risk. And so you get in this dilemma of doing things for your defense that is misunderstood, and you start to engage in an arms race as a result. I don't think that's what's happening in Asia. And in fact, I think as difficult as these challenges are, we have the People's Republic of China arming for the explicit intent of aggression. We have North Korea arming for the explicit intent of aggression. We have Russia already an unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Why do I say that about the People's Liberation Army? Xi Jinping has directed them to have the military capability to take Taiwan by 2027. That's capability, not intent, but that means they're explicitly arming for aggression. North Korea, Kim Jong-un's recent statements about foregoing peace and unification and declaring the South Korean people the enemy of North Korea, we can logically interpret their modernization efforts in the military area for the explicit purpose of aggression against the South. So I think that's important at a foundational level, because when you talk about confidence building measures, when you talk about negotiating away certain capabilities, we have to understand that our potential partners in these engagements are in fact trying to raise pressure, create coercion, not actually raise the level of confidence and stability. The Chinese, as I understand it, are not searching for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. They are attempting to coerce Taiwan and try to limit their latitude for maneuver when it comes to political options for their future status. So I think that's important to say out front. But it is a very dangerous world, and it's a dangerous world because there are countries that are arming for aggression and are explicitly against the status quo. We're essentially in this great power competition, a status quo power that is trying to underpin the free and open qualities of the region, and there are countries that seek to do otherwise and disrupt that status quo. So the near-term dangers are an accident or incident. When we see this level of operational tempo in the Taiwan Strait, the air flights across the center line, naval presence very commonly on the east part of Taiwan, that creates an operational environment that's very unsafe and could result in an incident or accident where we have very poor escalation control and very difficult crisis management. We have the situation in the South China Sea, as we've all seen on the news, with the water cannoning of Philippine vessels who are trying to resupply the crew on the Sierra Madre on Second Thomas Shoal. That's highly provocative. I mean, I think in our minds we sometimes think of water cannons as being sort of this benign, peaceful, not peaceful, but short of conflict. This is extraordinarily dangerous, and somebody will die from this at some point. It's extremely dangerous to fire those cannons at sailors on board ships. So the immediate challenge is an incident or accident and poor escalation control and crisis management. Now, we've worked very hard at crisis management, crisis communication modalities. I personally have had a role in developing some of these, the Military Maritime Consultative Agreement, which is an incident at sea-like agreement. Unfortunately, it works really well right up until the point you need it. For example, the EP3 incident in April 1st, 2001, we tried to invoke it, and the Chinese said, nope, not interested, we want to cancel it. A counterintuitive and I would argue counterproductive response if there ever was one. But we need to keep working at those things because this is a highly dangerous environment with the possibility that things could escalate to levels that here's where you and I agree, that's a world we certainly don't want to get anywhere near, and one of these incidents could potentially spiral up to that level. The other danger, of course, is the introduction of new technologies with certain military applications that start to create an environment where you may get momentum in a crisis with less human control. So the possibility of going from an environment of poor escalation control to really losing the ability to have any escalation control or management because decisions are being made not by humans, but the applications of AI and autonomous capabilities, that creates a whole new level of danger that we have to be very concerned about. I think lastly, the danger is at a sort of a more macro level, we don't have any ballast in the relationship with China right now. I mean, we all talk about competition. One thing I rarely hear people talk about is the fact that there's no countervailing sort of positive initiative or project. You know, in my professional lifetime, we always had something we could say, yes, we've got these problems, but we're working on this, right? It was in the Clinton administration, it was WTO accession. In the Bush administration, it was the war on terror. In the Obama administration, it was climate change and Iran deal. In the Trump administration, it was the Phase 1 trade agreement. We have nothing. We have nothing. We have things that the Biden administration would like to pursue, cooperation on fentanyl and climate and energy, I'm sure, but it's so modest and regarded as so unproductive, it doesn't create that needed balance and ballast in the relationship. So at the political level, it's a very dangerous era. So what to be done about this? I'm afraid that in the near term, it's about, because there's this phenomena of aggressor and defender of the status quo, in the short term, it's bolstering deterrence and all that entails. For us, that's mostly alliances and posture and things of that nature. But look, the nuclear element is very important here. And I think in the near term, the United States, I think, has a decent record, although, you know, the stain of the only country that has deployed nuclear weapons in wartime, but a very good record at intervening and preventing horizontal proliferation. We've intervened in countries like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, to prevent the development of a nuclear program. And part of the way we've done that is through the strength of our extended deterrence and assurances. I think that's on the table right now for very important reasons, not only for the protection of our allies, but to prevent the proliferation of further nuclear programs. And so the discussions that are ongoing right now, I think, are critical, not only for defense and deterrence, but to prevent further proliferation. And they're hard. I mean, the extended deterrence, you can think of it really in two pillars, one of which is the technical side. You know, how do we detect launches? How do we track targets? How do we assign interceptors or other defense mechanisms? And how do we optimize all that? That's a technical discussion that we can have, and people can end the conversation, everybody nodding up and down. The second pillar is trust us. Trust us. And that part is hard, that we might be willing to trade a great American city for, you know, the protection of Seoul or Tokyo. I think we would do it, and I think we have a track record of making sacrifices, including, you know, in the Korean War here, tremendous sacrifices. And we, of course, have 28,500 troops here, plus a lot of American citizens as expats. So I think we would do it, but it's a big trust us, right? But I think it's so important. Otherwise, I don't think the proliferation ends with Japan. I don't think it ends with Korea. I think it's a much more dangerous world than theirs, where I think you and I probably could agree, at least in the near term. But I won't speak for you.
Well, as one of those Americans sitting here, I certainly hope we can believe Mr. Shriver's remarks. You were making a bit of a semantics argument, and by the way, I do support you trying to question the very premise of the panel. Why not? We want to have a debate here. But if it's not an arms race, if you don't see it as such, how would you frame what's going on? Because very clearly there's Russia, North Korea, China, they're expanding their arsenals, as are South Korea, Japan on certain metrics. So how would you describe what we're seeing?
Oh, I think countries that are revisionist and trying to change the status quo in their favor and trying to create environments that are more enabling for their continuing authoritarian rule, but also regions and surrounding areas that are more deferential to their interests and deferential overall to these countries, which by definition is erosion of the free and open qualities. So are there arms race type characteristics to this? Sure. I mean, but again, look at what we're spending on defense. We've had tremendous spikes, one in the Trump administration, of course, a huge spike in the Bush administration for the global war on terror, but our defense spending is right now flat. It's not, that is not the defining quality of the region as I see it. I think the defining quality is ambitions that are being fueled and supported by military modernization of countries that want to revise the status quo in their favor.
Potentially playing into the hands of U.S. adversaries if we buy into this language of an arms race, that it sort of injects this hysteria, perhaps.
Well, again, this isn't a question of we're doing things for defense of ourselves that maybe are misunderstood, and we can work through this through dialogue and, you know, confidence-building measures. They're not trying to raise confidence. They're not trying to achieve peace and stability. They literally want to change the status quo in ways that are preferable to them, and that's a different dynamic, I believe.
Okay. Well, let's take the trust bridge over to Dr. Shin and see what he has to say.
Let me first thank you for the Asan Institute for having me this wonderful event. It is always a privilege to be part of this seminar. Today's topic is arms race in the region. It reminds me of my start of my career. I joined the Korea Institute for Defense Analysis in 1995. At the time, it's not exist. President of Asan, Dr. Choi-gang, was also working at the QAIDA. The division is Center for Arms Control. Now, the QAIDA does not have a Center for Arms Control. It disappeared. Minister of National Defense at the time has a Deputy Director General for Arms Control. It doesn't have that kind of position now. So, my approach is, we cannot but to think about the arms race because we do not think about today's investment in defense side is arms race. That's the perception gap. My first question is, how serious then the arms race today in Northeast Asia? I think it's serious. As I told you, because the government official never think today's investment in the defense field is arms race. They just think probably defense reform or strengthening their military. Here in Korea, there is a very famous and funny word in Korean, narrow number, which means if I do affair with a lady, from my perspective, it's a romance, but the others do the same thing, it's cheating. Our investment in the defense field is a defense reform or strengthening military capability, but the other countries invest in the defense field, we regard that armed race. Each country might have a same understanding. So, if there is a real arms race, each country did not perceive that is arms race. That's the problem, I think. So, I think that this kind of arms race lasts very long because of a conventional geopolitical rivalry in the region. As we all know, US, China, maybe China and Japan, South Korea and North Korea, and many other issues that not only comes from in the region. For example, outbreak, war in Ukraine, Middle East affect here. Oh, we have to strengthen our military capability, for sure. So I think that this is the serious problem. Although the government doesn't understand or perceive this kind of a problem, so civilian field must discuss this matter. That's my perspective. Although I worked at the government several times, but I'm fundamentally a civilian researcher, so I cannot put the comment in that way. Second point is, what is most serious area with regard to armed race? I totally agree with Dr. Schreiber. It's a nuclear proliferation. Here, once again, it reminds me of an old story. During the Cold War, up until 1990s, there is a word here in Korea that Northern Triangle relation and Southern Triangle relation, which means during the Cold War period up until middle of the 1990s, North Korea has a treaty relation, security relation with China and Russia. So we call that Northern Triangle relation. We do not use that term, so there is no that kind of vocabulary today. However, with regard to nuclear proliferation, China, Russia, North Korea, three of them increase their nuclear arsenal. I read a document last year, came from SHIPRI, the Swedish think tank, that China increased nuclear warhead 17% in year 2022. Russia did the same thing, not to mention of North Korea. So that's a kind of a huge concern. On the other hand, it's quite interesting. Dr. Schreiber mentioned the United States make a great contribution, not great, contribution, non-proliferation in Korea and Japan. Yes, that's true. Only the Southern Triangle, United States hold a nuclear weapon. And then United States provide the security guarantee in the name of extended deterrence. We used to call it nuclear umbrella. I have a confidence with United States extended deterrence. When I do my job at the Vice Minister of National Defense, I work a lot to strengthening extended deterrence. However, we cannot but think about that. If those countries in the north increases nuclear arsenal, it brings me a concern. But on the other hand, we means Korea, Japan are very limited. No, because of the abiding international norm of non-proliferation. We cannot develop nuclear weapon. Only we can trust this United States commitment. Government officials understand that very well, whether that is the diplomatic side, military side. However, ordinary people concerns more and more. So the arms race, nuclear arms race, poses great risk in the future. We have to understand that, so we have to continue work on the non-proliferation, not only for the US ally, Korea and Japan, but also more on North Korea or the big power relation, US, Russia, US, China. That's our hope. Third point is conventional weapons armed race. It's quite interesting. We notice each country in the region increases defense budget, put a lot of money to strengthen their military capability, but I do not have a big concern on this area because, these all countries not increasing stockpile. The amount of stockpile is not the matter. How to upgrade their conventional weapon in the state-of-art stage, and how to bring new technology in the military side. As Mr. Schreiber mentioned that AI, robot, and the automatic weapon system, that's a top priority of each military these days. Not only Korea, but also Japan and China, of course, the United States is the leading country. And fortunately, it needs money and technology. In this case, the Southern Triangle relations has much more money and much advanced technology, so we do not concern. But on the other side, it might bring some concern of China and Russia. That's the relation. That's a logical relation. So I think even in the conventional weapon system, we can think about the other norms. There is a developing norm in the limiting the automatic weapon system like that. So we have to think about it. That's the area of a future arms control. My summary is that, this is the arms race is serious problem, posing great risk in the region, not only in the region, but also overall globe. Second one, it's gonna last long. And the government officials, they try to increase defense budget and try to upgrade their weapons system. So, answer is, it is very hard to start this kind of arms control discussion in the governmental level. So like Asan, the civilian institution must start this discussion in the long run. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dr. Shin, you mentioned that the stockpile
Yeah.
of North Korea's arsenal doesn't concern you, but conventional weapons might. You mentioned AI. How close in your estimation, you were in the government not that long ago, how close in your estimation is North Korea hitting that more worrisome, troublesome threshold of
No,
technology?
they already crossed the threshold. My concern is that if they continue upgrade their conventional weapon system, stockpile is not a matter. Those so-called Scud missile, Nodung missile, they are replaced in more advanced Iskander-style missile like that. That poses more threat. So I think that with regard to nuclear weapons, their stockpile is a serious matter. But with the conventional weapons, they are developing brand new, more upgraded weapon system. That poses a more serious problem to Korea.
Sure. And speaking as a civilian, as you are sitting on this stage today, how would you assess what South Korea is doing from a defense spending perspective? Are they doing enough in your perspective?
The more is the better in my perspective, because as a Korean, we live under great threat from the north. For example, if Canada poses a nuclear threat to the United States, which is not happen, but probably United States take that very seriously. If Mongolia poses nuclear threat to China, and Mongolia say we are going to nuclear attack to Beijing, then China might feel that, might take that very serious.
No, China will
No,
not.
no, no.
Mongolia
that-
don't
that-
have nuclear
Yes,
weapons.
exactly. I'm just make an example. We live under great threat from the north. So for Korean are peace-loving country indeed. However, because of our geopolitical situation, great threat posed by North Korea, we cannot afford to increase our military capability. With regard to nuclear threat, we trust the United States extended deterrence, but there is a way to make a detailed process that can we trust more. So with that kind of a procedure, we can persuade our own people. Please don't worry. With regard to conventional weapons system, we have advanced technology, so we try to upgrade our military capability based upon that technology. That's the core of our defense reform.
Okay, thank you. We'll go next to President Hideshi.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, let me thank the Asan Institute for inviting me to this very important conference, and I'm grateful to all those people who made my trip to and stay in this wonderful city. Thank you very much. In the interest of time, I'd like to touch upon Japan's own national security efforts in the age of a great power rivalry, just in the interest of time. Japan is building up its own military capability in an unprecedented pace. As already Professor Nakabayashi mentioned it in the first plenary session, and also Randy, my friend, touched upon it a little bit in your initial remarks. It is the response, Japan's response to acute security environment surrounding Japan. And there are 3 points behind this decision. First of all, East Asia, particularly Northeast Asia, is at the forefront of the great power rivalry. And, of course, there are a number of flashpoints, and also, there are 3 nuclear weapon states surrounding Japan, Russia, North Korea, and China. I do not think that I need to refer to any specific facts related to these 3 countries, but I just would like to mention that, academics, I'm not an academic, but academics often say that if China strengthens its strategic nuclear capability as predicted, armed conflict in the regional level are more likely to happen due to the stability-instability paradox. Probably, Professor Ken Jimbo of Keio University may have been talking about it in the another room. This is his favorite topic. But anyway, this is my first point. And second point, East Asia, particularly Northeast Asia, is basically part of international community of sovereign states, but at the same time, part of global community without having to care much about national borders. And progress of globalization is a cause of the rise of the concept of hybrid warfare and also a gray zone contingency. In 1999, 2 years before the September 11th terrorist attack to the United States, 2 PLA officers wrote a very famous book, Unrestricted Warfare. And according to those 2 PLA officers, there is nothing that can't become a weapon. And they even said that there is no boundary between war and no war, and military and non-military. I think that's very correct. And third point, progress of globalization and the international response to, particularly to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, tell us another lesson. That is the importance of international partnership. A number of minilateral security frameworks, as already touched upon in the morning sessions, in progress in this region too. All these factors led to the establishment of the national security strategy of 2022 by the Japanese government. And it has 3 pillars. Of course, the first one is self-help by Japan itself. And the second one is the alliance relationship with the United States. And third is international security cooperation with other like-minded countries. And Japan is trying to strengthen its comprehensive national power from a whole-of-government approach. And particularly, the emphasis is on military capability enhancement, particularly jointness and sustainability, and also enhancement of economic capabilities, particularly focusing on supply chain resilience. And Japan's effort will contribute to the maintenance of the regional balance of power, but that is not enough. International efforts for the following 4 points are necessary. First of all, crisis management. This region lacks an overarching security framework. So regional confidence building and crisis management efforts must be continued. And so channels of communication must be kept open. Therefore, safety and freedom of speech must be ensured for exchange of candid views without any concerns about the possibility of being detained and being unable to come back home safely. Second, rule-making. Rules bring predictability and stability, so that therefore very important. In addition to the right understanding of the concept of the rule of law, actually, the South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy emphasizes the importance of the rule of law. This is very important. And in addition to the right understanding about this basic rule of the rules-based international order, it is an urgent task to establish an equitable norm in the new domain, such as cyberspace and outer space. And third point, enhancement of the credibility of the U.S. extended deterrence, as already discussed somewhat. Nuclearization of South Korea and Japan is non-starter, particularly for Japan, because Japan lacks a strategic depth. So strategically, it is not good. And also, if nuclear weapons are proliferated, it will undermine the deterrent power of nuclear weapons. So nuclearization of Japan would be non-starter. So South Korea and Japan should cooperate to generate the synergy of Korea-US Nuclear Planning Group and also Japan-US Extended Deterrence Dialogue, EDD. And finally, engagement of the United States in this region. I noticed that majority of the American people see current international conflicts, including the tension between China and Taiwan, as important to U.S. national interests as well as to themselves personally. So it's a sign of the U.S. willingness to engage in international affairs, but there remains strong inward-lookingness among Americans. U.S. allies must understand the diversity of the American society and also strengthen their public diplomatic efforts on the United States. And also, the allies, particularly South Korea and Japan, must work together in order to implement the spirit of Camp David with special focus on the US, Korea, Japan trilateral coordination of their responses to regional challenges that affect their collective interests and security. This is a very, very important, effort. So we have to, move together. So, 같이 갑시다. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. If I could ask one quick follow-up. There are some concerns of what happens to Prime Minister Kishida if he lasts another year. And under his administration, Japan has seen this dramatic expansion in military spending. What if Kishida gets replaced? Do you think what happens to Japanese commitment to military spending? Do you think that could change as a result?
Well, I am cautiously optimistic about that because today, there is a kind of consensus among the Japanese people about the necessity to strengthen Japanese, national security capability, particularly military capability. So even I'm not so sure whether Prime Minister Kishida will abandon his own cabinet or not. But I think that the current decision will continue even in next administration. But of course, there is an issue about tax raising and also about base issues, particularly with with regard to U.S. bases, not only about those bases in Okinawa, but it's everywhere, and also about the coordination among relevant government agencies, particularly Self-Defense Force and Japan Coast Guard, so on and so on. But I think we can be relatively optimistic about the future of the national security efforts of Japan.
Thank you. And if we could turn next to Major General Yao.
Thank you. First, I would like to join my fellow panelists in thanking the Asan Institute for inviting me to this plenum. We are talking about arms control. Arms control usually have two players. The two players are opposing each other. They compete in military investment to outmatch each other. They increase their military assets in quality and quantity, and they form larger and stronger military alliances and try to outcompete each other in new technologies. The aim is to dominate in potential military conflict or coerce and deter in peacetime with superior military power. I kind of agree with Randy that I don't think that the Asia-Pacific region has entered into a comprehensive arms race. For instance, the ASEAN states have increased their military spending by 4 to 6% since the end of the Cold War, which measures their economic growth in general. But Northeast Asia is quite different. The US and the DPRK remains enemies. Tensions between the North and the South persist. North Korea has no interest at all in giving up their nuclear weapons, and it has passed a law which allows preemptive nuclear strikes. The US and the ROK have consolidated, and also with Japan, have consolidated their military cooperation, especially in terms of extended deterrence. And in the current ongoing Ukrainian war, the DPRK supports Russia, and the US, ROK, and Japan supports Ukraine. We are witnessing the further bipolarization of the Northeast Asia. I think it is fair to say that China has been cautious in taking a neutral position in the war. And it is not in China's interest at all to have Northeast Asia divided into two blocks and have an arms race between the two blocks. And I agree that we all have to remember that in this area, we have 4 states which have nuclear weapons and 2 states which have nuclear umbrellas. So what about China and the United States? The US has a strategic competition strategy against China. China, likes it or not, has to respond, particularly concerning Taiwan. The US has increased arms sales to Taiwan, raised military relations and other official relations, and made clearer, more and more clearer commitment to defend Taiwan. China's constitution requests its military, that is the PLA, to have the capability to defend China's sovereignty and territory integrity. I don't think China and the United States currently are outright enemies. However, there are indicators that both are preparing militarily a potential conflict over Taiwan. This could lead to arms race, not an all-out arms race to wipe out the other side, but one which focuses on Taiwan scenario. And still, it is important to note that arms race of this kind is different from the one that happened during the Cold War. Lastly, I would echo my fellow panelists in drawing their attention to new emerging technologies such as cyber, outer space, and AI. Once they are put to extensive military use, they could be game changers in arms races. However, the military application of new techs carry unpredictable and very consequential risks. The current decoupling, or a euphemism for decoupling, that is de-risking policy against China, is an indicator that arms race is spreading to the realm of emerging technologies, and that is not a good sign. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Major General Yao. Maybe we'll pivot to the second round of questions here. What role do you think China should play going forward on non-proliferation?
You mean nuclear non-proliferation?
Nuclear, yes,
nuclear
nuclear,
non-proliferation.
excuse me, yes.
I think China should still make some effort to bring the relevant parties to the negotiating table so that we can at least freeze the nuclear increase, the nuclear arsenal on the peninsula. But I am not very optimistic about it, considering the current international environment that China is in, and the lack of political willingness to do anything really proactive to make a big and consequential change. Maybe a new government, I'm not sure, a new government in the United States or a new government in relevant countries. I would not particularly say that the new government in the United States, because I will be labeled to have interfered in US presidential election. I'm not going to do that.
If the world were to be getting along and you had all parties at the table, do you think China freezing its own nuclear advances might be part of?
China would not freeze the number and the size and the composition of its nuclear arsenal, but China would not change its no first use policy. China is modernizing and expanding its nuclear arsenal because its second strike capability, according to China's assessment, is in danger. And for some, the assessment of international environment, the assessment of the capability of potential adversaries and the strength of first strike against China's nuclear arsenal, and the detection, the destruction, and also the defense capabilities of other relevant countries who have the intention or the interest in wipe out China's nuclear arsenal with a first strike. So China has to make sure its retaliatory capability would be effective to deter the first strike.
Thank you. Mr. Shriver, if I could ask you, I'm personally not holding my breath that the U.S. and Russia come to any agreement on their own nuclear, proliferation deals in the years ahead. But what's your forecast in terms of the U.S. has led the world's ability to convince any number of countries not to proliferate nuclear-wise? What's your forecast on the U.S.'s ability to continue to play that role and have an impact?
Well, I think we will endeavor to continue that role. There are notable failures too. We tried through economic sanctions and other forms of pressure to try to persuade India and Pakistan to forego nuclear capabilities. Of course, that's a very notable failure. I think it's something we will continue to try to promote where our allies are concerned. That's where I think we could exercise the most control, and that also comes through the commitments we make through extended deterrence. But the point I'm going to blame jet lag. I started to make a point and didn't finish it in my opening comments that we lack any kind of positive initiative and a project that sort of gives ballast to the relationship. What I wanted to add was I think if we were to really put our efforts into some sort of arms control discussion, very broadly defined, I would focus on AI and autonomous capabilities with military applications, and I think that discussion, in my mind, would take priority over trying to draw China into nuclear warhead restrictions, caps. I think that's sort of the most dangerous area that's evolving right now. And I'm not sure I have high confidence that it would be successful, but I think it's something that we want to get out ahead of to the extent we can, and maybe that would be enough to have sort of one positive initiative to create ballast in the political relationship, but also do meaningful work in an area that's really creating tremendous risk and danger.
Sure. Dr. Shin, if I could ask you, I think maybe even Asan had done some of this polling in the past, but there are several studies that show public support for nuclear weapons in South Korea is quite high. I'm curious, what do you think of when you see that type of public support for nuclear weapons for South Korea?
I got that kind of a question more than dozens of times. My answer is always the same. If you ask Korean people, do you want a nuclear weapon? Yes. But if you ask Korean people, do you want a nuclear weapon? Even if your country got economic sanction from international community, so your salary might get affected, it drastically decrease. That's the reality. But recently, there's some changes. News from United States, so whether if Trump second comes, it might retreat USFK, and it might approve ROK has nuclear weapon. If that is the case, it will be drastically different. So I want to ask a question to General Yao. What if that is the case? What would be the Chinese response? It might.
In the case you have
If
nuclear
there is a
weapons,
new U.S. administration, he wants retreat USFK, instead approve nuclear-armed South Korea. What would be the Chinese response?
you mean the withdraw U.S. troops and have not South Korea to have the
Nuclear weapon.
nuclear weapons? Yeah, China would be opposed. China would oppose that. China think that if the U.S. withdraw the troops, it's good, but if the ROK has its own nuclear weapons, it's against the NPT regime,
Yeah.
and it would further complicate the situation on the Korean Peninsula.
Then
And I don't think that what our government in the
Yes,
United
okay.
States would withdraw
of
its
course,
military
of course.
troops.
Then my second
So it's a
question.
hypothetical
Second
question,
question
shouldn't have
goes
answered
to
it.
China oppose South Korea hold a nuclear weapon at the level of North Korea or even more? You know,
China opposed
North
both
Korea.
sides
both
to
sides.
have nuclear weapons, and China want to see a denuclearized Korean Peninsula. Not even South Korea. China does not even like South Korea's extended deterrence, because if you change your shoes into, if you change yourself into North Korea's shoes, you will see how scared North Koreans had been when they had been under nuclear threat with technical nuclear weapons deployed in ROK, and then extended deterrence, nuclear umbrella for ROK. It had been so many years that North Korea had not had their nuclear arsenal. So they have their security concerns. All the security concerns of each side should be addressed. Not each side, but all sides, including Japan's, United States, and China, and Russia.
And ROK has a security concern for our side.
Yes,
Yes.
that should be addressed. That should be addressed.
So at the same level against North Korea. Even more?
Considering the proliferation of nuclear weapons, China is against proliferation of nuclear weapons in any form for any party. It's just not a rule-based behavior.
I understand. But the matter is implementation. How strong you implement kind of a sanction or like that? I mean,
China complied with the UN Security Council passed resolutions, but not to endlessly and limitlessly. Once the North Koreans have done something good, there should be some response, positive response to lift some of the sanctions. China has been calling for that, and it had never been done.
okay. Thank you for your trouble.
Maybe we should switch seats. That's an interesting line of questions. Maybe I'd actually use the same spirit of that and ask a question to President Hideshi. You mentioned earlier before that Japan is going nuclear as a non-starter, but under this hypothetical scenario where South Korea is proceeding toward a nuclear program, how do you think Japan would respond? How should Japan respond?
Well, there are some Japanese who say that if South Korea is going nuclear, then Japan will have nuclear weapons. But I do not think that's a good policy, because as I said, if the nuclear weapons are more proliferated, the deterrent power of the nuclear weapon will be lost. Therefore, non-proliferation is in the interest of all the countries. So, Japan will strongly against proliferation of any nuclear weapons for any countries. But at the same time, Japan will not go nuclear. It is against its own interest. So it is more important to strengthen the credibility of the U.S. extended deterrence. And there are more than 50,000 U.S. troops stationed in Japan. It is not just a symbolism. It is a proof of actual combat operation in time of need. So therefore, providing more dependable and operational, dependable stationing and operational environment for the U.S. military forces is necessary, and that is more important.
Okay, thank you. And before we open up the floor, I just wanted to turn back to Dr. Ruff, just to establish how long you've been an expert and sort of leading intellectual on this, when did you first focus on nuclear proliferation as a topic?
I really got involved with this in the early 80s. My parents were German Christians living in Palestine who were displaced by both world wars and lost many family members, as many in Korea have, and knew firsthand the horror, the long-term loss and injustice and deep inhumanity of war. So that was the story that I heard from my old people growing up, as many of you did. In 1983, the World Health Organization produced its first report on the effects of nuclear war on health and health services. And the World Health Assembly, the body of all of the health ministries of the world, agreed unanimously when reviewing that report that nuclear weapons constituted the greatest immediate threat to health and welfare. So I was a young doctor reading this at the time of the height of the Cold War, where everyone alive then, with ears to hear and eyes to see, could feel palpably the real and present danger of nuclear weapons being used every day. So I was just struck. This is what the lead technical agency in the world is saying about the danger of nuclear weapons, yet where is the public attention and the public health, the medical attention to this as a totally preventable global health catastrophe? It demanded professional attention because our deep, sacred oath that you take as a health professional is work not just to relieve suffering and treat disease, but to promote the conditions for health and apply prevention, particularly where no effective treatment is available. So it very rapidly became obvious to me as I joined evidence-based advocacy efforts through International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, how important the authority and access could be in reaching the then leaders of the United States and Soviet Union and essentially convincing them that, as Reagan and Gorbachev famously said, a nuclear war can't be won and must never be fought. So I could see in practical terms how effective that evidence-based advocacy would be. So that really set me on the path of this being the main mission for my professional work.
Well, thank you. And of course, the Cold War ended, and we saw some, good efforts for non-proliferation. I mean, as a young doctor, could you have ever envisioned that we would be in a moment like we are today?
Look, there's a lot that's gone well. Nuclear weapons numbers have gone from 70,000 to just over 12,000. South Africa has given up voluntarily its nuclear arsenal. Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine gave up former Soviet nuclear weapons, but yet we're in this profound danger now of a much more complex multipolar world that relies on this, very fragile house of cards of so-called nuclear deterrence, which is essentially code for a demonstrated capacity and willingness to incinerate millions of innocent human beings with radioactive violence at very short notice. That's what it practically means. So I think the work of ending the first Cold War was never finished. That historic opportunity to wind back arsenals when George Bush Elder disarmed thousands of nuclear weapons, tens of thousands of nuclear weapons disappeared. That historic opportunity was lost, and we're dealing with the aftermath, that what we know now about the consequences being far worse than were known in the 1980s, that unfortunately that decline in nuclear weapons numbers and even the decline in their average yield from megaton range to 160 kilotons or so hasn't materially made us safer, because that destructive capacity is still enough to essentially end the capacity of the Earth to support complex life. So the problem is unfinished business, and as long as it's unfinished business, we're all under that cloud.
All right, well, let's lift the cloud on the audience questions. Is there a mic passing around? We have a woman standing here in the center back.
I'm from People's Liberation Army, Academy of Military Science. I have a question for Dr. Shen. They're saying that while Pyongyang takes sides in Russia and ROK is helping for US, so that is a phenomenon that the whole peninsula is joining the Russian-Ukraine conflict. So what's the comment of you, and what's the future of the peninsula in your opinion? Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Good question. You need this kind of a distinction. Our cooperation with the United States, our support in the Ukraine, there is a limitation. We do not offer offensive weapon system to Ukraine. That's for sure. But what North Korea does this day is sending their missiles. That is totally against it. Second one, North Korea got a United States Security Council sanction, prohibited the military deal with other countries. That's another problem. So I think it's not parallel. It's totally against. On the other hand, your second point, North Korea's cooperation with Russia, I think it poses great risk in the region because it actually helps North Korea develop nuclear weapon. This is my answer. Thank you for your question.
Great. We have this gentleman here has been. Yep. This right here.
Yeah, thank you. I am Yong Seop-han, former professor of Korea National Defense University. My question goes to Mr. Hideshi, my old friend. Soon China, Japan, Korea trilateral summit will take place soon. In the past trilateral summit, military issues was not discussed at all. But at this time, it is very important for three countries to raise this military issue because a nuclear-armed Kim Jong-un is more adventuristic and enjoys making nuclear crisis, which will evolve into the brink of nuclear war. That happened in 2018, right? So three countries leaders should meet. At that time, you need to raise this military issue, how to install crisis prevention mechanism. So this is a common interest of three countries in preventing crisis and managing crisis, and giving advice to Kim Jong-un not to make crisis. So Japan is very well positioned to raise this issue because two countries are very attached to Korean Peninsula, but you are very clever in raising this issue to create crisis prevention mechanism on the Korean Peninsula. What is your comment?
Well, Professor Han Yong-sup, thank you very much for the very important question, and nice to see you again. Actually, I think you are right, and I do not have any, opinion against your comment. The denuclearization of North Korea is in the interest of these three countries, and also, for Japan and South Korea, deterrence is very, very important. As someone already said, the North Korean issue is not a matter of non-proliferation, but a matter of deterrence. So it is very, very important for us, Japan, U.S., South Korea, and other like-minded countries to get united to deter North Korea first. And at the same time, of course, denuclearization effort shouldn't be abandoned. So, including China, we should push pressure North Korea. So I think the coming trilateral summit meeting of China, Korea, Japan is a good venue for discussion of that issue.
And I'm afraid we're running out of time, but I think we were able to see some firepower here on stage today. Thank you very much. And I think perhaps next year, if we run back the same session, we put a question mark at the end of the session, arms race. Let's thank everyone up here in their time. Thank you.